Well, hello everyone. Here, show you right here, talking about these photos right here of the rain, and a lot of times we're probably thinking too is that yeah, are we really that desperate to know about what exactly is it about rain? That we like to look at rain and maybe about the fact about what the effects about rain is, and you're thinking too that yeah, you think about puddles of water, don't we? Especially if it's maybe 3 feet, and especially whenever you do look outside and want to know too just a little bit about what it's doing, outside. If it's storming real bad outside, and maybe if there's any flash flood watches and warnings being issued, and so that's why it sure seems that way. That when we look very closely at what it's doing outside, that there's these puddles of water that's forming in the ground like that. And if we were to look very closely at a lot of that, it's like, yeah, that normally you would see something like that in the lakes and streams and ponds, but still, that you see right here the grass right down there, and so that's about maybe 3 feet of water right there that's forming in the yards right there, right? And so you're likely thinking too that it don't seem all that bad until you actually walk in there, and you might realize about maybe how wet it is. I'm like, if you had to, if you are a farm worker, or if you do have to get outside for to go places, and then like you say, yeah, you enter places where it's all flooded, places that are flooded or places that are covered with water, and that's why it sure seems that way. That yeah, that different ways of how you can tell about a flash flood watching and a flash flood warning. And most of the time, that if there's enough rain coming down at maybe more than 27 inches, and then there will be chances are that there will be warnings issued if there was anything such as rising water levels within certain areas around the county of the state. I'm like, yeah, around the county, that you're gonna maybe have overflowing creeks and streams, and even across the river. And so that's why it sure seems that way. That there was 1 minute of the part. There was one part of the day where you have it where it was 5 hours ago that you looked out there, and it was nice and sunny, and then it started pouring down rain real hard, and then all these puddles and everything start forming. And that's why it sure seems that way. That whenever it comes to looking at the rain right here, but still, that just want to show everybody here these images right here, because it sure seems that way. That when we look at the rain right there, we can also see a reflection right there. So it's like, yeah, about 3 feet of covered, the ground covered in water like that. And a lot of times it sure seems that way. That yeah, if there's enough rain coming down, that it's some areas of the ground are going to start flooding, and being covered with the surface of the ground is going to start flooding with water. And that's why it's like, if you were to actually do the studies about that and want to know about how deep that rainwater is, and like I want to know too that yeah, whenever it comes to understanding about flash flood watches and warnings, and just wanted to know too that yeah, you see these droplets right here of the rain, but you're still, a lot of times you're likely thinking too that how do you know how bad it's going to get? Maybe until you start seeing what it's actually doing outside. Whenever you start walking around, and then you see the amount of rain that that's flowing around the creeks and the streams and all, and you're like thinking too that yeah, you go ahead and you take a picture, and you kind of see what the weather is doing right here. So this right here looks a little bit like a stream right here forming in the yard right here. So like Eve, I think too that yeah, there was one moment where that this right here was actually a yard right here, but then all covered like yeah, a lot of that ground is all covered in water, and so that's why it sure seems that way. that whenever we think about that whenever there's any what are the signs of whenever you can tell if there's any source of flood warnings or any flood watches and all that going around. And a lot of times it's like, yeah, well, whenever you see the rising level of the rivers and the streams and all that, but still but at the time you want to know too that what can we really tell about what's going on right here. And but I say that, yeah, that ain't no lake or anything like that. That just, a formation of rainwater being collected. It's flowing from the ground and going into the streams and going into it's going into the creeks and the storm domes. I'm like, yeah. So a lot, the drainage pipes. I'm like, yeah, it's pouring, it's going into the drains, man. But still, that it's like whenever we look at a lot of the rainwater, though, that it's like well, I know about exactly what direction is it flowing, and at the time you want to know too that what does it usually mean whenever you do see rain water flowing certain areas, and it's like, yeah, if it's flowing towards the stream, or is that waiting until it evaporates, and that's whenever that there's only so much time before you actually see a rainbow or something like that. So that's why it sure seems that way. That whenever you look at some of these pictures right here, and you have right here is the rainwater right there, and likely thinking too that you look at that rain, that's coming down like that. 102 that yeah, well, the chances of there going to be a flood though, but at the time, it's like, yeah, that only about maybe 15 or 20 inches of rain, right there. But still, it sure seems that way. When we look at some of these weather pictures though, that a lot of times you're probably thinking too that what does that usually mean whenever you see the ground like that all covered with water, all covered in rain. And does that usually mean that the grass is wet enough to where that a lot of the remaining water droplets that remain afloat? And at the time, it seems like that's kind of like the weather trivia question right there. That for how much rain that the ground is able to absorb, and to where that starts coming afloat. And so that's really something to think about right there. But the way I think about it too, though, that whenever it comes to understanding about the rain right here, that you see right there, those droplets right there of the rain. Like I'm thinking too, that yeah, well, you all know that if the water looks too dangerous, not to cross or go not to walk into certain areas where water covers the ground like that, and so it sure seems that way. That when we think about flash flood warnings and watches, and then it maybe flash flood advisories or anything like that, and I can think on too that yeah, well, that at the time you're thinking too is to where that yeah, but there was one area of the yard to where that everything was all dry. Everything was all moist and dry. I'm like, the ground was dry, but then before the rainstorm came, and that's whenever a lot of the surface of the ground like that start covering up with water, and a lot of times, like everybody else would say too, that that's whenever that you would think is to where yeah, that's whenever the water comes afloat to where it starts flowing into the drains. And but anyway, just a typical study about the weather right there. But anyway, I'll talk about that. Thanks for watching.